Jared stood, unnoticed in the crowd hoarding the hall of the great palace. He leaned against the marble pillar, blinking with tiredness and confusion. It was midnight. He had been roused from his bed by shouting and bells. He had pulled on his clothes and joined the crowd of noble folk surging through the hall. "The king is dead," the people were whispering. "The young prince is to be crowned at once." Jared could hardly take it in. The king of Deltora, with his long, plaited beard and his golden robes, had died of a mysterious fever that had kept him in bed for the last few weeks. Never again would his deep, booming voice be heard in the hallway of the palace. Never again would he sit laughing in the festive hall. King Alton was dead, like his wife the queen before him. The fever had taken both of them, and now Endon will be king, Jared thought. He shook his head, trying to make himself believe it. He and Endon had been friends since they were young children, but what a difference there was between them. For Endon was the son of their king and queen, the Prince of Deltora, and Jared was only the son of a trusted servant who had died in the king's service when Jared was only 4 years old. Jared had been given to Endon as a companion, so the young prince would not have to be lonely. They had grown up together like brothers. Together they did their lessons in the schoolroom, teased the guards, and persuaded the cooks in the kitchen to give them treats. Together they played in the vast green gardens. The other children who lived in the palace, the sons and daughters of nobles and servants, kept their own rooms in their own part of the grounds. As was the palace custom, Jared and Endon never saw them, except for the great hall on feast days. But the two boys did what they could to entertain themselves. They had a secret hiding place, a huge hollow tree near the palace gates. There they hid from the fussy old Min, their nursemaid, and Plandine, the king's chief advisor, a tall, thin, sour man that they both disliked. They practiced archery together, playing a game called Aim High, where the first to shoot an arrow into the topmost fork of the hollow tree would win. They invented a secret code and used it to pass messages, jokes, and warnings to each other from under the nose of their teachers, Min or Plandine. Jared would be hiding in the hollow of the tree, for example, because Min would want him to take a dose of the fish oil medicine that he detested. Endon would walk by and drop a note where he could reach it. The message looked like nonsense, and no one in the palace could guess the meaning if they picked up the note by accident. But the code was simple. All you had to do to decode the message was write down the letters in a line, leaving out EL wherever it appeared. Then, you divide the letters into words and they made sense. Do not go into the kitchen, Min is there. As Endon and Jared grew older, there were less time for games. Their days were filled with tasks and duties. Much of their time was spent learning the rule, the thousands of laws and customs by which the royal family lived. The rule governed their lives. They sat, Endon patiently and Jared not so patiently, while their long hairs were plaited twined with gold cord, according to the rule. They spent hours learning to hammer red-hot steel into swords and shields. The first king of Deltora had been a blacksmith, and it was part of the rule that his art should be continued. Each late afternoon they had an hour of their time free. The only thing they were not allowed to do was climb the high wall that surrounded the palace gardens, or go through the gates beyond the city. For the Prince of Deltora, like the king and queen, never mingled with the ordinary people. This was an important part of the rule. It was a part that Jared was sometimes tempted to break, but Endon, quiet, dutiful, and obedient, anxiously begged him not to think about. "It is forbidden," he would say, "and Plandine already fears that you are a bad influence with me, Jared. He has told my father so, and if you break the rule you will be sent away, and I do not want that." Jared did not want it either. He knew he would only miss Endon sorely, and where would he go if he was to leave the palace? It was the only home he had ever known, so he tamed his curiosity, and the city on the wall remained him such a mystery to him afterwards as it was to the prince. The sound of the crystal trumpets broke into Jared's thoughts. He turned, like everyone else, towards the back of the hall. Endon was entering between two rows of royal guards in pale blue uniforms trimmed with gold. Poor Endon! Jared thought. He is grieving. He was there to be by his friend's side, to comfort him, but he had not been summoned. Instead, Chief Advisor Prandine stalked Endon's right hand. Jared looked at Prandine with dislike. The advisor looked even taller and thinner than usual. He wore a long purple robe and carried what looked like a box covered by gold cloth. As he walked, his head poked forward so that he looked like the head of a great bird of prey. Endon's eyes were shadowed with sadness, and he looked very small and pale in his stiff silver jacket with its high, jeweled collar. But he held up his head bravely, as he had been taught to do. All his life he had been trained for this moment. When I die, you will be king, my son, his father had told him so many times. Do not fail your duty. I will not fail, father, Endon would answer him obediently. I will do what's right when the time comes. But neither Jared nor Endon had thought the time would come so soon. The king was so strong and healthy that it seemed like he would live forever. Endon had reached the front of the hall now, and was mounting the steps to the platform. When he had reached the top, he turned and faced a sea of faces. He is so young, a woman near Jared breathed to her neighbour. Shh, the neighbour warned. He is the rightful heir. As she spoke, she glanced nervously in Jared's direction. Jared did not recognize her face, but he realized that she knew him and feared that he might tell Endon that her friend had been disloyal. He looked away quickly. But now the crystal trumpets were sounding again, and a low, excited murmuring had begun in the crowd. Prandine had put his burden down on a small table beside the throne. He was sweeping the gold cloth aside to reveal a glass box. He was opening the box and taking out something that shone and glittered. The magic belt of Deltora. The crowd gave a hissing sigh, and Jared too caught his breath. He had heard of the belt since his early childhood, but he had never seen it before. And here it was, in all its beauty and mystery, the ancient object that for thousands of years had kept Deltora safe from invasion by the Shadow Lord who ruled beyond the mountains. Hanging between Prandine's bony fingers, the belt seemed as delicate as lace, and the 7 huge gems set alongside it looked as beautiful as decorations. But Jared knew that the belt was only made from the strongest steel, and each of the gems played its own special part in the magic that protected Deltora. There was the topaz, symbol of faithfulness, gold as the setting sun. There was the amethyst, symbol of truth, purple as the violets that grew in the banks of the River Dell. For purity and strength, there was the diamond, clear and sparkling as ice. For honour, there was the emerald, green as lush glass. There was the lapis lazuli, the heavenly stone, midnight blue with pinpoints of silver like the night sky. There was the ruby for happiness, red as blood, and the opal, symbol of hope, sparkling with all the colours of the rainbow. The crowd seemed to hold its breath as Prandine bent the loop around the Endon's waist. The advisor's fingers fumbled with the fastening, and he was standing well back. He seemed almost afraid, Jared thought curiously. I wonder why. Then, suddenly, the fastening snapped closed, and his question was answered. Prandine sprang backwards. There was a crackling sound, and, at the same moment, the belt seemed to explode with light. The gems blazed like fire, lighting the hall with the rainbow brilliance. The people cried out and turned away, hiding their eyes. Endon stood with his arms upraised, almost hidden by the flashing, darting lights. No longer was he just a young boy with sad eyes. The magic belt had recognized him as the true heir to the throne of Deltora. He, and he alone, could now use the mystery, magic, and power. But will Endon use them? Jared thought suddenly. Did his father use them? Did his father ever do anything but follow the rule laid down ages ago? He watched as the fire of the gem slowly died into a winking glow. He watched as the young king took the belt and handed it to Prandine. He watched as Prandine, smiling now, put it back into the glass case. Jared knew what would happen to the belt now. As the rule stated, it would be carried back to the topmost room of the palace tower. The door of the room would be locked with 3 gold locks. 3 guards in gold uniforms would be put outside the door, and then life would go on as before. Prandine and the other government officials would all then make the decisions affecting the kingdom. The king would attend ceremonies and feasts, laughing at the clowns and acrobats in the great hall, practice archery and blacksmith's art. He would sit for hours while his hair and, one day, his beard were plaited. He would sign endless documents and stamp them with his ring that bore the royal seal. He would follow the rule. In a few years he would marry a young woman chosen for him by Prandine, a daughter of one of the noble families who had also spent her life inside the palace walls. They would have a child to take Endon's place when he died, and that child would also wear the belt only once, before having it locked away. Now, for the first time in his life, Jared wondered if this was a good idea. For the first time he wondered how and why the belt was made. For the first time he began to doubt the wisdom of letting such a power for good remain idle in a tower room while the realm he was supposed to protect laid unseen outside the high walls. He slipped unnoticed out of the great hall and ran up the stairs to the palace library. This was another first for him. He had never loved study. But there was one thing he needed to know, and the library was the only place likely to find them out. Chapter 2. The Belt of Deltora. After hours of searching, Jared finally found a book that he thought might help him. It was covered in a faded blue cloth and gold lettering on the outside. It had been worn away. But the title inside was still very clear. The Belt of Deltora, its history, its power, and its magic. The book was nothing like the splendid hand-painted volumes that he and Endon had read in the schoolrooms, and nothing like the many other weighty books on the library shelves. It was a small, thin, and very dusty book. It had been tucked away in the library's darkest corners amongst the piles of papers, as though someone wanted it to be forgotten. Jared carried the old book carefully to a table. He planned to read it from beginning to end. His task might take him all night, but he did not expect to be disturbed. No one would be looking for him. Endon would be going straight from the hall to the chapel, where his father's body lay surrounded by candles. He would keep watch there alone until dawn, following the rule. Poor Endon, thought Jared. It has only been a few days since he came for his mother. Now he is alone in the world, as am I. But at least we have each other. We are friends to the death, and I will protect him as best as I can. Protect him from what? The question pierced his mind like a sharp knife. Why had he suddenly begun to fear for Endon? Who or what threatened the all-powerful King of Deltora? I'm tired, thought Jared. I'm imagining things. He shook his head impatiently and lit a fresh candle to brighten the darkness. But the memory of Prandine's thin smile as he locked the magic belt away kept drifting into his mind like the shadow of a remembered nightmare. He frowned, lowered his head to the book, turned the first page and began to read. In ancient days, Deltora was divided into 7 tribes. The tribes fought on their borders but otherwise stayed in their own place. Each had a gem deep within the earth, a talisman with special powers. There came a time when the enemy from the Shadowlands cast greedy eyes on Deltora. The tribes were divided, and singly none of them could repel the invader who began to triumph. A hero called Aiden rose from the ranks of the people. He was an ordinary man, a blacksmith who made swords and armors and shoes for horses, but he had been blessed with strength, courage, and cleverness. One night, Aiden dreamed of a special and splendid belt. 7 steel medallions beaten to the thinness of silk and connected together with a fine chain. To each medallion was fixed one of the tribal gems. Realizing that dream had been sent to him for a purpose, Aiden worked in secret over many months to create a likeness of the bell that he had been shown. When he travelled around the kingdom to persuade each tribe to allow its talisman to be added to it, the tribes were at first very suspicious and wary, but one by one, desperate to save their lands, they agreed. As each gem became part of the belt, its tribe grew stronger. But the people kept their strength secret and bided their time. And when at last the belt was complete, Aidan fastened it around his waist, and it flashed like the sun. Then all the tribes united under him to form a great army, and together they drew away the enemy from their land. And so Aidan became the first king of the united tribes of Deltora, and he ruled the land longly and wisely. But never forget that he was a man of the people, and that their trust to him was his only source of power. Neither did they forget that the enemy, though defeated, was not destroyed. He knew that the enemy is clever and sly, and though it is anger and envy 1,000 years is like a blink of an eye. So he wore the belt always, and never let it out of his sight. Jared read on, and the more he read, the more troubled he became. He had a pencil and some paper in his pocket, but he did not need those to take notes. The words of the book seemed to be burning themselves into his brain. He was learning more than he expected, not just of the belt of Deltora, but about the rule. The first to leave the belt aside was Aidan's grandson, King Elshred, who in his middle years grew fat with the good living and found the steel cut into his belly. Elshred's chief advisor soothed his fears, saying the belt needed only be worn on great occasions. Elshred's daughter, Queen Aedina, followed her father's way, wearing the belt only 5 times in her reign. Her son, King Brandon, wore it only 3 times, and it became the custom for the belt to only be worn on the day the heir took the throne. At the urging of his chief advisor, King Brandon caused the Rallied builders to raise a great palace on the hill at the centre of the city dell. The royal family moved from the old blacksmith's forge into the palace, and over time it became custom for them to remain within their walls, where no harm could come to them. When Jared closed the book, at last, his heart was heavy. His candle had burned low, and the first dawn was showing it through the window. He sat for a moment, thinking. Then he slipped his book into his shirt and ran to seek Endon. The chapel was below ground level, in a quieter corner of the palace. It was still and cold. The old king's body was lying on a raised marble platform in the centre, surrounded by candles. Endon was kneeling beside it with his head bowed. He looked up as Jared burst in. His eyes were red from weeping. "You should not be here, Jared," he whispered. "It is against the rule." "It is dawn," Jared panted, "and I tried to see you." Endon stood up stiffly and came over to him. "What is it?" he asked in a low voice. Jared's head was filled with all the things that he had read. The words came tumbling out of him. "Endon, you should wear the belt of Deltora always, as ancient kings and queens did." Endon said to him in puzzlement. "Come," Jared urged, taking his arm. "Let us go now and get it now." But Endon held back, shaking his head. "You know I cannot do that, Jared. The rule—" Jared stamped his foot with impatience. "Forget the rule. It is just a collection of traditions that we have grown up with over the years, and been made by law by chief advisors. It is dangerous, Endon. Because of it, every new rule of Deltora is becoming more and more powerless than the one before. This must stop, with you. You must get the belt and put it on. Then you must come with me outside the gas plates." He was speaking too fast and wildly. By now Endon was frowning, backing away from him. "You are ill, my friend," he was whispering nervously. "Or you have been dreaming." "No," Jared insisted, following him. "It is you who are living a dream. You must see how things are outside the palace, in the city and beyond." "I see the city, Jared," argued Endon. "I look at it from outside my window every single day. It is beautiful. But you do not talk to the people. You do not walk among them." "Of course I do not. And it is forbidden by the rule," Endon gasped. "But I know that all is well." "You know nothing, except for what you were told by Prandine," shouted Jared. "And is that not enough?" The cold voice cut through the air like sharp steel.